Thanks so
All
much,
right.
Tyler.
Yes. There you are. All right. I'm going to just pin you so everyone can see. um, so, yes, RJ. So everyone from the description I just gave, everyone knows kind of what you do, where you've come from. But it'd be interesting to get your own kind of background description, a quick description of what you do, how you got there.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. So I think really early on, I was I think most of us really enthralled with all kinds of different aspects of life. Um, I'm talking like as a child, right? Like the world is just so exciting and so interesting, and there's so many things to understand and figure out. And then you have to choose sort of like a narrow focus when you go to college. And I chose engineering for a variety of reasons, and then worked as a pure engineer for a while. And what I found is that while I really liked the problem solving aspect of engineering, I found that it wasn't satisfying because it didn't speak to me in such a total way um, that pre-engineering did. And the thing that was missing is that I felt like I could work on technology, but that technology wasn't really the problem. That really what was the problem was people. That people were always the problem. Like that was the really hard thing, and I really didn't understand people at all. As a big time introvert, especially. And so I decided to go back to school to study people and to try to understand people. And so I went to MBA school to do that. And while at MBA school at MIT, I hung out a bunch at a place called the Media Lab, and the Media Lab really turned me on to the world of bits, to the virtual world, and particularly to data. And it was at MIT that I saw all of this excitement with data and the virtual world. And then I also observed sort of early smartphone internet. And I was just really frustrated. And frankly, I'm still frustrated by how content is delivered to us on our screens. And I thought that there was something there worth chasing. So it was at MIT where I made a really hard commitment that there was this field which helped convey content that I thought was really interesting and frankly really attractive, right? It's a very not only useful thing, but it's also a very beautiful thing. And so I was at that was probably around almost a decade ago when I decided to commit hard to the field of what I now call data storytelling, but we didn't call it that back then. And the last decade probably deserves its own its own narrative, but that's sort of how I landed in I think into our community.
Cool. Yeah, that's really interesting. I can definitely relate to that feeling of engineering and kind of looking out and saying, maybe it's not about the technology. Maybe that's not the solution to everything. Um, but so you published Info We Trust a couple of years ago. Since
Mhm.
then, you still work as a practitioner. Um, is there anything in your recent work that would be worth mentioning just to kind of give people a sense of the type of work you do these days, in addition to the book you're working on now?
Sure. So my practice is varied, meaning that I've served a whole lot of different clients over the last decade. Um, Government clients, big corporation clients, academic clients, and I've done a lot of different kinds of work. I've sort of gravitated to what the client needs, rather than like pushing a very particular type of I only do dashboards or something like that. And so my most recent work across the last year or so has been doing data storytelling about COVID, like probably a lot of us. And so that's ranged everywhere from making very, kind of sensitive dashboards to not doing only storytelling with data, but quite a lot of storytelling about data. And so, one of the reasons we do data visualization is to demonstrate and convey what data we're missing, what data is worth going after. And so COVID is, an incredibly dynamic field, and there's, huge efforts, national and sometimes international efforts on what data do we need to go grab. What are we going to dedicate our limited resources to? And so I've been involved in a movement which is called the Real World Data Movement, which is a movement on how do you make, evidence-based decisions, data-driven decisions, that aren't based on randomized clinical trials, but are still based on something. Because COVID's moving so fast, we have to make decisions. So that's what I've been kind of involved with as a day job for the last over a year now. It's been all COVID work. But there's a lot of projects. Before that. I think like the type of work I like doing most is developing encoding languages, and so looking at very particular data sets and trying to help organizations figure out like this is how you might start out representing it.
Cool. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned COVID is kind of, if you're working in data viz, whether you're working with COVID or not, you're ultimately telling the story.
Yes.
I work at a mobile games company, and we work with financial data, and this COVID is ingrained in the data. You see the performance was affected, and that's just such an interesting thing how it has really pervaded our lives everywhere.
Yes, it has.
So, all right, we'll talk about Visionaries in a minute, because I think we're all really interested to hear about it and the work you've done. But before we do,
great.
I have one quick kind of question. I think this would be helpful for everyone to just kind of orient us. So you're a data viz practitioner and a historian. How do you think knowledge of data visualization history is helpful to a practitioner?
So it's helpful in a number of ways. I'm gonna talk about sort of an additive way and maybe a subtractive way. And so the additive or positive or constructive way is that if you look at people who did this in the past, in one sense they're very similar to us. They had the same challenge in that they had too much data. They had data illiterate audiences. Their data was difficult to work with. Their tools were difficult to work with, right? But they still had to convey some sort of meaning. All right, so their challenge was similar, but the context that they were operating in was vastly different. Different data sets, different time, different tools. And because they were trying to do a similar thing, but in a different context, what that means is that the solutions that arrive to them naturally, right? The first thing that they would think to do is very different often from the first thing that we would think to do. And so what you see across the tradition of data visualization, and it's a long tradition that goes back at least 400 years, depending on how you slice it, is a beautiful, sort of platter of information problem solutions. And so it's really nice to just have at your fingertips this big sort of like menu of options. So that's sort of like the constructive optimistic kind of like there's all these different techniques that we just are out there to be revived. But the second thing is that I don't think if you only understand what's happening today, I don't think you understand how narrow the practice is today, how limited the practice is today, because the way we operate today is very, very controlled and constrained by our digital environment. And so digital environment is wonderful because it allows us to do things we could never do before, particularly scale, right? We can scale stuff in terms of big data sets, but also in terms of replication of techniques, unlike anything before. But also it's incredibly hard to do anything custom today. Like if you want to do something really original or something different, it's very, very, very expensive. especially relative to the past. Why? Because if you're drawing everything by hand, there's actually not that much benefit to doing something, similarly, right? Because you're going to draw it anyway. So there's very little marginal cost to doing something differently, to trying something new. So in fact, there's a lot more creative freedom in the past, in some dimensions at least, than we have today. And so I believe it's very, very important that you have to understand how different eras did this thing in order to recognize the deep grooves that you're in today. Because if you're only familiar with the modern digital environment, you're going to look around and you're going to think like, oh, this is wonderful. It's so vibrant, but you're really seeing only a part of the potential landscape of solutions. So I think that there's an optimistic, like, go find solutions, right? But then there's also like this more kind of constraining kind of like, but also recognize how limited we are today. We're really on, we're still climbing a particular ladder in terms of digital data visualization, where we're trying to get back to the point that we were with analog tools. We rose very, very high with analog tools as a craft, and then we had to kind of break everything back down to geometric primitives that would render on a computer screen. And we're still sort of stuck in this spot where we're still trying to figure out how to do everything that they were able to do beforehand. And again, that's not to say that we can't do things that were impossible back then. Of course we can. I think like the final and more poetic thing is that, digital data, has revived this craft and supercharged it like nothing else. And in order to participate today, you have to, you don't have to be a computer scientist. I'm not a computer scientist, but you do have to be able to tell a computer like what you want it to do, right? You really have to operate a computer, and that's not necessarily true of the past, right? Like the people who arrived to it were people who could sketch, people who could do computation, on their own, not with a calculator necessarily, but actual human computers. They're just different profile of person, a different type of person. And so like that's also interesting to see like what a completely different, kind of like class of personas, would solve these information problems. And even more poetically, I think that what studying the history does for me is it links me to a tradition. It links me to thousands and thousands of people who have not only done what I'm trying to do and done it well, they've actually improved the craft. And there's a real sense that, so that they lit the flame, or at least, enlivened the flame and passed that torch on to us. And I think that for a field which is so spread out in terms of, there's not a terrible number of, professional programs or professional societies. If you're working in a company, you might be the only person, who's able to do this. Like we're a fairly lonely lot. And
certainly true.
And understanding that actually that's not true. That you're actually part of a very proud parade of people that include people from all over the world, doing all kinds of different things, and we're all somehow connected. I believe that gives me some sort of internal momentum and purpose.
That's great. It's a very like sweeping kind of view of things. I was thinking when you mentioned kind of the historical, practice, and how there was like a whole range of things that people would experiment with and try, and they might end up being their end result because they didn't have computer limitations. They didn't have to know how to write code. It was just hand drawn. I read this book. I don't know if you've read this, Scott McCloud, Understanding Comics. It's about comics, but I like reading it. I was like, this applies so much to data visualization. And he talks about exactly what you're describing, even down to, how like it goes into abstraction, and how I'm doing the triangle. That's like one of the graphics he uses to describe it. And it's so interesting looking at that and kind of following it.
Yeah, there's a diagram in Info We Trust that's loosely based on McLeod's triangle, where I'm going to open up a PDF so I can present it. But the idea is,
I was going to say, I was thinking of writing a Nightingale article based on that, but it looks like you beat me to it.
Oh, well, no, look, I mean, one of the things about information is it's really not about, information isn't about the one perfect thing that you can produce. And once you produce that thing, then the work is done. Information is it's really a process, and it's really sort of a constant, honestly, like a constant onslaught. Like there's just, there's no end to it. And so if there's a good idea, for that good idea to travel, it's not enough to just have that good idea. You actually have to, continually reinforce that idea. And so, yeah, I would encourage you, no matter what I've done, to keep pursuing, to keep, kind of like sharing the good message, right? Like it's actually very important to keep doing it. So here's, do I have screen sharing permission?
You
I
should.
do. Look at that.
Yeah.
Look at that. Okay, so here's a PDF of my book Info We Trust, and I use the triangle to summarize what's essentially an EDA process, a private internal exploratory data analysis. And I somewhat intentionally use a lot of different forms to explore a question and try to answer a question that's related to the orientation of French Gothic cathedrals. But at this point, I say, like, we have we have sort of like a pure abstract chart. We have a geographic map. We have a pictorial diagram. These are one way of categorizing information graphics. Of course, maybe you have others. This is the way I think about it, is like maps, charts, and diagrams. And of course, a lot of what we do lives somewhere in the middle. And so you can have a diagrammatic map, right? You can have, a thematic map. And really, I think at its best, and what I love the most, is when you're not playing with one of the pure forms, but actually you're inventing a new form, something that's in the middle, something that learns a little bit from all the forms that are out there and combines into maybe a new encoding or a new way of presenting the data. Why? Well, maybe because it's a way of gathering it, like attracting attention. Like, look at that weird thing. People will pay attention to it. But more than that, it's like each data set is maybe a little particular, and so you want to tailor the form to represent that data set.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. I don't remember that diagram, but now I got to check it out. Read the accompanying text.
Yeah,
very cool. Okay, so sorry, I now have to ask this question as a follow-up to that first one,
please,
because I think I know data scientists who would have a potential response to your answer, and that would be,
okay,
our domain that we work with for data visualization is narrow, and it's narrow because we have all this modern research, and it's told us what's the most efficient and effective way of communicating data. So why should we look at these old things that might have been like suboptimal, so to speak, when we can communicate so much quicker?
Yeah,
paraphrasing.
So yeah, I think that there's a couple things that we have to say to that data science. One is that data visualization, data storytelling is a part of data science, right? Like we are also data scientists. And so we get a voice in this debate. The second is that they're wrong, in that the problem is that there is no optimal, efficient solution for communication. Why? Because communication is incredibly context dependent. It depends on your audience. It depends on the data. It depends on the particular message that you're trying to convey from that data, whatever that might be. And it also depends on the actor. The art of communication is not one way. The art of communication is two ways, right? It's actually a dialogue. Even if the audience doesn't say anything, I'm going to talk to you about the books, the new books today. I'm at the very beginning of talking about these books. I've, talked about them to very few audiences of any size. Guess what? I'm going to get better at talking about these books, right? Because I'm going to learn from just how you react to what I say. But usually communication with an audience, you get even more feedback. I mean, look at, and the best example is John Byrne Murdoch's Financial Times COVID charts. Like it's the most incredible, I think, data storytelling project of, I don't know, several years. Why is it incredible? It's not incredible because he was able to produce any particular individual chart. What's incredible is that a dialogue happened where he was able to iterate his charts over time and not only improve them versus from feedback and from what he learned, what worked, but he was able to improve them because the audience literacy improved with him, right? Because they learned how to read his chart. He created this incredible communication dialogue. So there isn't a best way to do anything. There are always better ways. Better ways are always possible. And usually, at a certain point, there's other constraints that come in that say, okay, you have to ship this for now. But there's no efficient best way to do things. And usually if there is, like, whatever solution they might point to, like, this is the way to do it, usually that's the thing that nobody will actually engage with because it's so boring. Like it's just, it's going to be so uninteresting that nobody's going to look at it. And there's a certain science culture that likes that, sort of like the drier the better. Like they look at there's a culture in academic science of incredibly poor communication, right? Like nobody actually wants to read a scientific paper. Like they're not written for consumption. So if you want to, if that is your information or communication culture where you're going to produce unintelligible artifacts, like that's fine, and you can play to that crowd. But that's like that's not what I'm interested in. Like I'm interested not in creating information artifacts that plug into some ancient culture. I'm interested in informing, right? Like I make information to inform. Like that's like I'm not obsessed with the object. I'm obsessed with the verb, with the action, right? Like the information doesn't matter until it actually informs.
I hear you. I appreciate that. I'll make sure to bring that up next time this debate comes up.
Yeah. Tell all your data scientist friends.
All right. So let's talk about Visionaries real quick before we do. I just want to let everyone in the audience know, if you have any questions or thoughts, make sure you put them in the chat because we will have a Q&A after, and we'll definitely be using your questions for that. Anyway, okay. So Visionaries, what can you tell us?
Okay, so this was, well, I think, like, here's the most important thing. This was supposed to be live, right? Like this week. And we were supposed to like talk about it like 2 days after it launched. And for a lot of logistical reasons, we pushed back launch. So what was supposed to be kind of like riding the coattails of like this new project, which is announced, has actually become a very special preview. So like in some sense, like this entire event has actually gotten some juice. So I could tell you about it, but actually I want to show you it because I mean that's kind of like what we do, right? So I'm going to show you like the first, I don't know, 8 slides or so from our pitch deck, and kind of introduce you to like not only what it is, but like why it is, right? And then we can talk about it a little bit, right? Okay. Information graphic Visionaries. So this is a new book series. We have 3 books, each celebrating a spectacular data visualization creator. Emma Willard, who is an American educator, entrepreneur, Florence Nightingale, famous public health reformer, and Etienne Jules Marais, incredible scientist, inventor, who wrote the first significant book on data visualization titled La Méthode Graphique that has never been translated to English. And so now we have it, the graphic method. Okay, so that's like up front, that's what we're talking about. But I'll step you a little bit back, and I feel like I need to tell you why, right? So we cannot navigate modern life without maps and timelines and charts. The creators of these graphics saw what no one else could. By sharing their vision, they brought new clarity to the world. Astonishingly, their full stories remain untold. So I want to talk about that. Their full stories remain untold. When we think about historic data visualization, you might think of one iconic graphic, right? You might think of Florence Nightingale's polar area chart, Menard's march to Napoleon's march. But like, we don't really give these graphics, these artworks, these incredible products, the same treatment that we would a scientific discovery, the same treatment that we would a famous oil painter. Like, we don't look into their rich catalog, look into their letters, like try to figure out what were they doing, how were they doing it, like look at their entire system body of work. Like, I don't believe that we've been giving these historic creators the credit that they're doing. We're not elevating the work in the way that they deserve. So in particular, who are our three heroes? So Emma Willard. So Emma Willard wrote that in history, I have invented the map. And she is right. So she used geographic maps in incredibly interesting ways to put together history, particularly American history. So she's credited with writing the first draft of American history. And then she stretched beyond that. And she made what I consider to be the most insane, crazy timelines ever. She made stuff like this, the Temple of Time. And so she made many time temples, but this is the most famous one. It's a perspective view on time. This is just a detail of it, but the idea is that she's mimicking how we think about time, where the present day is in the foreground. It's very clear, there's a lot of detail. And then as you stretch back into history, into the distant past, things become, details become more sparse, things become a little bit more blurry. That's Emma. You've probably heard of Florence Nightingale. She's just full of great zingers like this one, where she's talking about how she's, whenever she's infuriated, she revenges herself with a diagram. And, of course, we know her most famous chart. But no one's ever really pieced together how Florence Nightingale created her charts. Like, who drew them? What role did she play? And with this book, we've gone and found draft diagrams, her edits, all kinds of letters where she's talking about her charts and data, and actually like pieced together exactly how it was done and how she coordinated a really, really impressive team to produce these graphics. And then finally, Marais. Marais wrote that these views have taught us to discern the appearance as reality. So what's incredible about Marais is that he understood data visualization, I think sooner than almost anybody else. He understood how it works. He understood why it was so special. And he wrote about data visualization at a time where there was no vocabulary for it. And so what that means is that he was forced into really, really colorful language, poetic descriptions on what is going on. And he not just wrote about it, he actually illustrated it. And when I say he illustrated it, he collected examples from the entire history of data visualization. And he's doing this in 1878, which means he's looking back nearly 100 years and saying, this is all the stuff that's important. And the most famous example that he elevates is this one, right? So Menard's Napoleon's March is actually like the version that we're really familiar with. We're not familiar with Menard's version. We're familiar with Marais' cartoon version of the Menard chart. It's actually Marais who popularizes this graphic. So those are the three heroes: information graphic visionaries, right? We're celebrating these creators. And then these are the books. So we have 3 books with these partial dust jackets, and the dust jackets go away, and you see the entire book. So that's sort of the long intro into the series.
Very nice. So I have a lot of questions. I'm really curious.
All right.
what's like the content of the book? Is it telling those stories behind them, or are they more kind of specific to their data visualization work and more of like kind of showcasing their work and the progression?
Yeah. So the book, each book has each book has its own character. Okay. But that said, the book is sort of built on this idea of each book is going to have two components, and each component serves something that really does not exist in 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 current data visualization publications and in our culture. So one is new writing, new scholarship based on new research, and this writing is presented by an international team, and so we have the experts on these different people, these different creators contributing to that writing. And there's a primary voice for each volume, and then also somebody who's introducing. And between the primary voice and the introduction, you have sort of the leading scholarship on what was going on with these creators. So that's one component, and that the idea behind that is that you're getting beyond sort of like, here's a 3-sentence blurb that's like attached to a graphic in a coffee table book, right? Like we want to elevate and honor this this work by scrutinizing it, like by really investigating it. All right, so that's one component, and depending on each book, that's going to be about 40%, maybe 50% of the book. The balance of the book is high quality reproductions of these artifacts. And so when I say high quality, I mean, we've gone out and we've actually spent the last year and a half or so photographing all of these artifacts, hundreds and hundreds of pictures at very, very high resolution, very, very high quality. And we are reproducing them at actual size, or in some rare cases, near actual size, including Willard's Temple of Time that we talked about. That is coming as a fold-out poster that's going to be inserted into the back of the book as a 40 by 27 inch movie size, poster, like absolutely huge. Because the thing is that, going back to our original conversation, we're actually quite limited by these, right? Like this is a very, very tiny canvas, right? So behind me, I saw someone in the chat, somebody commented on Du Bois's chart, right? Like that, this is actual size. Like this is an actual size, this is how big it was. Like look at the size of the canvas that he had to work with. But also, like, look at, we have the Du Bois book here, right? And if we flip through the Du Bois book, we can maybe find the exact same chart. But look at how this is presented, even in a book form, right? Look at how tiny it is compared to the real thing. And the size matters because that's part of the information. And maybe not so much with Du Bois, but with someone's work like Willard's, like you actually have to see it actual size in order just to read it, in order just to comprehend it. Something can be static and it can be interactive, if it's rich, if there's a lot of texture to it, right? Because you actually have to spend a lot of time. You have to step away from it to get the big picture. And then you can zoom in with your eye, you can rotate it, right? All of this stuff. So these high quality reproductions is the second aspect that characterizes the work. And so, there's sort of, there's a lot of behind the scenes I could show, but this is sort of what we're talking about. So this is a photo of us at UCLA Library photographing one of Nightingale's bar charts, and we photograph her bar chart, and this becomes, here are the two sides that we mentioned, right? So on the left, you have essays and annotations that take readers behind the scenes to understand stories and new discoveries. So that's the first piece. But then you have the second piece, actual size reproductions of information graphics that display the richness of their craft. All right. Doesn't that sound exciting?
It's really interesting. Because I don't know, our experience is really limited. I think almost anyone who works in data viz these days is working on a computer for everything, except you like everyone has their notebook that they like take scratch notes. So even just understanding how people made like print graphics for like distribution, like at that basic
Yeah.
level, that's interesting. So to see how these
Mm.
people are kind of breaking the mold even back then.
Yeah, I made so my most sensational COVID work um was actually produced in print, meaning that it was printed and would go into a situation kind of like, room, protected room, because they couldn't bring in a screen to display. And so they were actually printing it out and distributing it. And I didn't learn this until many weeks into supplying these graphics. And like, once I heard this, I like, oh my God, like, and I had to reformat like the aspect ratios and everything in order, because I figured out like what paper size they were using. And it's like, so yeah, print, like, but beyond that, like, print is like, if you actually want to make like an impact on somebody, like, everybody looks at everything on screens, like go make a like a little actual print publication and figure out how to get it delivered to somebody. Like, I guarantee you, like, it's going to get more attention than the most beautiful graphic you can like email to them.
Absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, it's also the process itself for making this book. I'm curious, how long was this kind of process to get the books from idea to publish?
Well, they're not published yet. So, I mean, we don't have physical artifacts to show you. So that's still coming. That's still, a few months away. It's not very far away, but we're not quite there yet. But on next Tuesday, we are announcing the project and crowdfunding it via the Kickstarter platform. And so that's like a significant milestone, obviously. I've been thinking about this since publishing Info We Trust in January 2019 as my next big endeavor. And so I learned quite a lot about making books by making Info We Trust, and frankly, like, really fell in love with the process of making books. Books. I'm a bibliophile. I love books, and I particularly love information graphic books. And, behind me is, hundreds of information graphic books that go all the way back to the 1760s. And, I think every significant, data visualization creator is on that shelf, at least once. And and so Info We Trust taught me a lot about making books, and also like pushed me to want to do more. And, particularly collecting all of these books, it showed me like how many awesome things you can do in print with information graphics that we just don't do today. And people love it. Like, people freaking love it. Like, I can't tell you like how much connections and engagement I have, just sharing like, little stuff, like, this is a little Marie Neurath book that just came this week. It's a book about social studies. And, it's just this, we don't make cute little books anymore. Like, we should, right? Like, your cute little books are really cute. And like, this thing's just like, freaking loaded.
Oh,
It's
wow.
just, fantastic, stuff. So, all right. So 2019 is kind of like the blurry beginning of the timeline. I met the partner in this endeavor. My partner is editorial partner. His name's Lorenzo. He's not on this call. Lorenzo is a designer. He doesn't come from data visualization. He's an Italian designer, and has worked at all these big fancy pants design firms like Pentagram and Sagmeister and Walsh, and so Lorenzo helped me figure out the graphic language for the book, how to package it. He and I spent almost 2 months solid exploring exactly what was interesting about this. He really pushed me, figured out like what was this idea. And so this whole like graphic packaging with like the big modern container that sort of recontextualizes and reintroduces, but then also elevating the artifact. So the artifact is very, very, he's the one who said it has to be actual size. Like, that's very, very important. This is all Lorenzo's genius. And so he and I have been working very, very intensely every day for a long time in order to launch these books.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. I mean, the design looks really interesting, like just the covers alone. Um, I was also going to say, you mentioned those small books. I feel like that could be like a commentary on the publishing industry and how it's kind of modernized with, you
Well,
know,
it's standardized. It's standardized. It's grown to be, there's a maybe around here, if you can see on my shelf, like this group. Do you see this
it,
group?
yeah.
This group has all been published in the last eight years or so. And
Mm,
you can see that, going back to, they're like your data science friend. They've optimized. They found the most efficient solution. And what happens when you find the most efficient solution? Everything looks the same. And
yeah,
what happens when everything looks the same? Well, nothing's interesting anymore.
totally.
Contrasts. I mean, I've refactored my bookshelf like a lot, but generally these are kind of in chronological order, and you can see that actually there's like quite a lot more variety, right?
Yeah.
As like early on, there's like quite a lot more variety, and then you get to like a certain point, it's like, oh, this is like all the same. Um, so yeah,
By the
there
way,
is. Yes.
anyone who hasn't should check out RJ's Twitter feed. You've got like unboxings and you're like, show some of the more interesting graphics from a lot of these books. It's really cool stuff. You'll see exactly what he's talking about, how, they do things with graphics that like we never see. But anyway, yeah, sorry, go on.
Uh, yeah. So old books is an inspiration, and then the modern publishing industry is, again, this is like more of a critical or pessimistic kind of influence, but it's like I'm not satisfied, right, with what traditional publishing is able to produce.
Mm,
And so that's why that's how we believe that in books, in beautiful books, and we believe in beautiful data visualization. But in order to do that, like, you can't do that necessarily with the traditional publishing industry. Like, you have to go do it yourself.
mm,
And so everybody working on this new book series, we're all veterans. We've all published books, with traditional publishing industry, and we, like, none of us need, like, to be published by like some big name press or something like that, like, because we've already done that. And so, like, what we're all obsessed with is just making beautiful books the way we want to make them, right? And so that's why the crowdfunding is necessary, because not only do you need the funding, like, that's important, but like, you need the crowd. Like, you need people that to go with you and say, yeah, like, we want beautiful books too, and we believe that information graphics deserve beautiful books. Yeah, so that's kind of like the big idea.
absolutely. It makes perfect sense. Um, uh, okay. Um, let's turn to questions. Because we've been talking
Great.
longer than we expected, and I'm sure you have to be somewhere at some point today. Um, all right. So Nina asks, how did you pick the three visionaries? Did you have a longer list to choose from initially? Was there a process there?
Yeah, there's definitely a process. So I do have a longer list. And really, there's like a market driven, like, it just came down to a market driven choice. And market driven meaning like the market of ideas, in that I cast a very wide net. I've identified probably 24 or so titles that I want to produce in this series. And I looked at all of them, and I evaluated them, and I said, what are the stories that deserve to be told, like, most? Like, what stories haven't been told that just need to be told? And these are the three that I think, because look, there's some risk in this endeavor. Like, there's a risk that I will only ever produce three. There's a risk that I will never produce all 25 or 30 or 50, titles that I want to. Hopefully I get to, but you don't know. So you have to lead with the ones that deserve to exist. The ones that deserve to exist most. What are the three stories that deserve to exist most? And I believe it's these three, all for different reasons. Florence Nightingale is useful because people know about her story, and so she's an attractor in some sense. But like, almost like everybody who's told her story, like, this narrow niche facet of her story, which is her data graphics story, like, they've just gotten it wrong. And they've gotten it wrong because, for two reasons. One, because her overall story is so amazing. There's all kinds of other aspects that have always dazzled historians, but also, like, all of these historians are not practitioners. like none of these historians actually understand how to make a bar chart and what it takes and what it means to get data. Right? Nobody understands that process. So I think this is one of the lenses we bring to it is our own understanding of how to create data graphics, but also we just have an interest in it. We have an interest in, there's many examples where Nightingale's words have been transcribed, but the diagrams that were in that letter were not, because historians are interested in words and not interested in pictures. And so I'm able to read a transcript and see that there's a description of some sort of hand sketch diagram and say, well, let's go photograph it, right? I mean, duh, like that's simple, that's obvious to us, but nobody else has ever done it. So Nightingale is sort of like, very attractive for all those reasons. Emma Willard is just an incredible force to be reckoned with. She has this 40-year career producing graphics, and starts in sort of very derivative kind of work, and then breaks off and starts doing her own thing, and kind of evolves her craft to a point where she makes graphics that I've personally tried to recreate digitally, like make digital twins, and I can't. It's like I don't understand, like I still am just like blown away with the perspective work she did. I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful. And what's incredible about her is not only she's making batshit crazy graphics, but she's actually shaping how Americans think about America at a time when America was very fragile, when America was unraveling, when America was tumbling towards civil war. Emma Willard was making graphics that were trying to pull the country together. And so Emma Willard's story is really amazing. And then I also had a the beginnings of a relationship with the world's top Emma Willard scholar, which has, since we started collaborating on this volume, blossomed into a real incredible friendship. And and so Susan Schulten, who's authoring the Emma Willard book, one of the joys for me of working on this series is being able to learn from and talk to and really frankly just enjoy all these other contributors. So that's Nightingale, that's Willard, and then finally there's Murray. And the thing about the Murray book is that the Murray book is incredibly influential. Like if you're really into data visualization, history, and I don't mean today, I mean across the last 100 years, everybody loves this book, but it's a book that only insiders have ever really appreciated. And that's because it's in French, it's never been translated. And so you have this kind of like, again, like I think of our field as this tradition, as this craft. And one of our foundational texts has been lost, not lost, it's been locked away in a language that most practitioners aren't able to access. And so the big idea behind this is you could think of Nightingale and Willard, potentially being a little bit more popular, and Murray really being sort of like one for us. It's like it's really one for the acting data visualization practitioner. So that's kind of like the looking backwards. That's sort of how we explain the three lead visionaries.
That actually, I think that description, I don't know, I feel like I really understood with that. Also, I don't know, you can kind of tell your passion and enthusiasm for all this. That made me a lot more interested in all three.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. I mean, the other thing I'll say about Nightingale is I think that what's the main thing I learned about Nightingale is Nightingale did data storytelling at a time when all of her, because she was operating in a competitive information ecosystem, right? Like everybody's trying to gain advantage, attract attention, get their, public policy sort of advanced. What Nightingale did, and they all used charts. They all had access to the same data or similar data sources. And a lot of them used charts, but a lot of them did sort of rote data visualization stuff that is like sort of similar to big data statistical tables, where it's like, it's a document of record and reference. It's not a document that persuades you. Like what Nightingale figured out how to do is to take a form, and she writes about this. She writes about bar charts. She's like, oh, they're using bar charts, we should do that too. But her bar charts are just so much more interesting. And it's because they're so much more focused. They're so much better labeled. They're better annotated. They're better colored. Like just the entire system, the entire composition has a lot more intention behind it. And so you can think of Nightingale's competitors as people who like opted for that sort of, most efficient, optimized, sort of solution. They followed all the rules. Or Nightingale, she was successful because she went way, way, way beyond that. So it's sort of the difference between data visualization and data storytelling.
I hear you. Very interesting. Okay, next question. We got two more questions. So George asks, so could a good prerequisite for getting a deeper understanding of data visualization be to work by hand and kind of almost create these almost kind of works of art, data art? I guess if you follow.
I don't think it's necessary to work by hand. Let's think. So working by hand can mean a lot of different things. I think it's necessary to work by hand generally. Everybody I know who's really, really good at creating digital data visualization has a sketchbook that they're always working in, and there's actually sort of a rhythm to working on the screen, moving off the screen, working in the sketchbook. And so when you're working in the sketchbook, you're working by hand, but you're usually not working with data. Usually what you're doing is you're playing with form, right? Pure form, and you're playing with encodings, and you have a sense of what the data can do. And it's just a lot faster. Like there's no more tighter link between the brain and the external world than pencil and paper. I was just like, even incredibly, beautiful and powerful coders, like my friend Shirley Wu. Like Shirley Wu has just, her sketchbooks are amazing. All right, so working by hand in general is important. I think the question is like, is it also important to like completely produce a project by hand? I remember, when we say by hand, like a lot of these people, they didn't, it's not like they were like lonely woodsmen in a cottage, like putting this stuff together. I mean, they had systems of people, in order to collect this data and analyze it and process it. And, a lot of things that we have now turned into digital tools, were just fulfilled by others back then. So all of that said, I do think it's interesting, and this is something I did once upon a time to try to imitate, whether digitally or analog. It's really useful to try to either create like a digital twin of some of this work, or just try to like look at their work and adopt some of the design flourishes. Because what I found is, when like you're going to learn a lot more about the design decisions that these people made by trying to do it yourself, than simply more so than just looking at it and critiquing it. You're going to realize their brilliance and their accomplishments when you try to imitate, again, either by actually like recreating it, which is sort of like a thing. I think it's much more interesting to try to apply their techniques to your own projects, because that's when you really realize how hard it is to pull off some of the things that these people pulled off. So yeah, I think there's a lot of ways both to have a creative dialogue with past works, and also to incorporate handcraft work into your process.
And this is a question I actually feel like I could contribute a little to. My own experience, I mean, I definitely do hand sketching, but you mentioned kind of working with form. Like so many other data viz people, I do a lot of digital kind of generative art on the side. And I think just that experience of kind of what happens if I try like a circle and I change the radius based on, whatever, or like,
Mm,
experimenting with shapes and form, and um, just kind of seeing what happens when you mess with things and get unexpected results. I think
mm.
that goes a long way. If you're interested in that kind of domain and kind of pushing out of just the standard visualization practice.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way of characterizing like the utility of generative digital art.
Hmm. There's something to it aside from now, the whole NFT cryptocurrency, what have you.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. I'm going to so as we approach the hour, I'm going to put a link in the chat that everybody can to the Kickstarter. And so you will only see a preview. You won't see as much as I've shown you already. But it will also give you an opportunity to be notified once the campaign goes live on May 11th. I guess because of your time zone, you'll have some sort of advantage because it's going to go live very early in the morning here in California. And so it'll actually go live at like a normal hour for you. And there's as a sort of an ask, but also advisory, like it's very important that a campaign does really well on launch day. Like that's what can make or break a project. But also like all of the best prices are also available on launch day, right? And I expect I expect all the the early backer kind of options to sell out, probably within hours. That again, that's at least the hope. So, but if you go to that link, then you won't miss any of that.
Excellent. You have time for one more question, or do you need to be on your way?
No, please. Yeah. Let's go to the hour if you want.
Sure. All right, 4 minutes, lightning round. Do the books this is from Alenka, do the books include to some extent their thought process when designing the visuals? I guess some insight into the process, maybe through
Yes.
sketches or okay.
Yeah. So we have edits, we have drafts, we have correspondence and letters where they describe the process. It's very like the new writing is very much focused on their craft. And also what we've done with the photographs is we've built complete visual catalogs of their work. And what that allows us to do is to study the evolution of their work. There's a really big difference in like seeing kind of, I don't know, Vermeer's Girl with a Pearl Earring and looking at Vermeer's entire catalog of work and like understand how he got there, right? Like that's like, and even more of a difference to like looking at like the whole landscape of like what was happening in painting, in that time. So you really need context to appreciate this. Like these works deserve more than just being tiny little like images and like that aren't connected to anything in a coffee table book, right? Like coffee table books are great. I have like lots of them surrounding me right now, and they're useful. But like this particular form, I believe also deserves to exist.
Great. I got one more extremely quick question. Favorite book that's not about data visualization?
Nick Souzanis's On Flattening. Yeah, absolutely. That's the book I actually tweeted out about it this morning. That book I gift more than any other. Nick is a comics professor and friend of Scott McCloud, who you mentioned earlier. And Nick wrote his PhD about our experience of the world, about visual learning, as a graphic novel, and it's called Unflattening, which references which references Edwin Abbott Abbott's story Flatland, which is very important to our tradition as well, right? Like the idea of understanding different dimensions and how somebody from a one-dimensional world would understand a two-dimensional object, things like that. So Nick Souzanis Unflattening, there's somebody can probably put a link into it. Nick's also really active on Twitter and is a really good follow. He's an absolute inspiration.
Oh, I definitely got to check that out. All right. Well, we'll call it 2 minutes early. RJ Andrews, ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate you taking the time. It's great to kind of hear your enthusiasm and excitement about this. It really, I've caught some of it. I'm really interested to see how this unfolds. So the Indiana Jones of data visualization here. Thank you very much.
Awesome. I'm putting Nick's title at least right in the chat so you can look it up. Yeah. Okay, next time in person, okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, I look forward to that. Bye.
That's right. All right. That was great. And let me refer to my schedule here. So next, we'll talk about the challenge. So Pat, you ready?
I am so very not ready. So actually give me a couple of seconds and I'll just put it on, and I'll close down all my other browsers and all of that stuff.
I'll just talk about Wonder real quick.
Yeah, so, sure. You do that first.
Wonder is I guess you'd call it an alternative to Zoom. Basically, the plan is we're going to use that for networking right after this. So we're going to share a link. Actually, maybe we could share it right now. Basically what it is, it's you see a screen and you see a bunch of circles. Each circle represents a person who's in the meeting, and you click to move your circle around. When you're close to other circles, other people, you start video chatting together automatically. So in that way, it's kind of like we're in like an actual room and we can move around and see everyone. I was going to give a demo, but I think it's going to kill my computer because I'd be streaming video twice. But so we can all just join, and if we have to, we can broadcast to the room and give you guys a little primer. All right, Pat, you look ready now. Am I reading you?
Let's see. Let me just. Oh my! This was strange. Zoom is very small right now. There we go. Now it's big. All right. So we're gonna have a new challenge. I'm still actually doing the write-up for the last one. It's more or less done. I just want to add all the images and maybe connect with some people as well, some of the participants. So if you don't know, we're running a challenge. It comes out very seldom, but it does, and hopefully it will come out a bit more often now. So. Right, so what do we have here? We're doing a Stockholm Data Visualization Meetup Challenge, and this will be our third one. And we usually take some data that's Stockholm related or Sweden related. And that's at least the idea that we want to have. And then we add a twist to the thing, a design constraint, something that needs to make you think a bit outside of your normal comfort zone. So what we've done first, I think it was, we just used two colors. It was black and white, and we visualized weather data with that. The second one was, since a lot of people consume their data on, let's see, my phone is there you go. That was my kids as well, on a phone. Our second visualization was, challenge was to do data on a small format. And it was really interesting because I love the way that people actually, you had a size constraint, but a lot of people made the visualization small and then put annotation above and below. So that was awesome. I like people thinking outside of the box, which was exactly what you were doing this time. So the next challenge that we have, and I'll see if I can share my screen, and we're going to go for, oh my, that was interesting. Google Chrome, there we go. Doesn't seem to be working. Let me give me a couple of seconds. Oh no, it doesn't want me to share my screen right now. So Tyler, I'm gonna put a link here in the chat right now, and we're gonna put that in our Slack as well. So we're putting up the challenge here. And the challenge this time is we're going to look at some election data. It might not be sexy, but it's actually pretty interesting. I think it gives you a little bit of an insight into what people think about life and everything. And the constraint this time is using a metaphor, and the metaphor has to be from nature. I will also put in a nice little slide deck from Ali Torban that runs a podcast called Data Wiz Today, and she has a blog as well. So where she talks about metaphors as well. And in the middle, there are some really nice examples that you can get some inspiration from. All right, I think that's it for me right now for the challenge. I'll post them as well on the Meetup page and the discussions and in the Slack channel for challenges as well. So I hope that's works with you. All right, Tyler.
Oh, we got a question. Elenka asked deadline.
I put it last time. We were thinking the first one was really short. The second one we did 2 weeks, and I think we're going to do this one as well for 2 weeks. 1 week to look at the data and 1 week to prepare your visualization, I guess. I actually like data sets that are pretty large, so be prepared that this is quite big. There is well, it's a lot of data, but you can do I bet you can work with it. When I try to use this on my new computer, I tried to just quickly fix it up a little bit on Google Sheets, and Google Sheets crashed. So I filtered it a little bit more now, so it's a bit less data, but it's still a lot of data. So I hope you can find a story in it.
I was going to say, if you're so inclined, you don't need to go use all the data. You can just
use the data that you want to. I mean, I give you a lot of data because I want you to be able to pick and choose and find the story that you want to do. Also, I mean, if it's something strange with the data, just ping me in the chat and I can do some aggregates if you want to. So we can refine the data together.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, then that's that. The link to Wonder is in the chat. We'll also post it in the, I'm going to, stop